A new mission for the USS Constitution. Chapter 2.
In his ready room, David sat and thought about this situation. Then, reaching into his desk drawer, he pulled out a pad of yellow-lined paper and a pencil, and he began to write a message, thinking, "In God we trust, everyone else we verify." A short and concise note developed under his hands. "Admiral, we have Vice Admiral Susan Stone aboard. Is she on special assignment for you? What is her mission?" David. David quietly. Computer. Message burst to Admiral Halloran. "Notify me if we receive an answer in privacy mode." Lieutenant Stevens had the con. Larry was busy with the duty roster, and David studied Krill space. He noted a lay of the land, so to speak. This would be absolutely vital to their mission and their very lives. Then he received notification of a burst transmission.
David, Vice Admiral Stone is not under my command. I am not aware of her mission. Take care, you have my authority to take any action you deem necessary for or against Admiral Stone.
David stashed the message in his desk, and he locked the drawer. Then he entered the bridge and assumed the command chair. Stella told David they were near the appointed location. David touched his comm badge. "Admiral, we are less than 20 kilometers from Krill space." "Your orders, sir?" She replied.
"At 10 kilometers, come to a full stop and go dark."
David replied, "Aye aye sir." "Helm, another 10 kilometers, then all stop." "Lieutenant Jensen, ship wide, please." The lieutenant replied.
"Ship wide, sir."
David spoke. "Now hear this, this is the captain. On my command, the ship will go dark, stay alert. Captain out." Stella spoke.
10 kilometers, sir."
David responded, "Lieutenant Jensen, ship wide." He replied.
"Ship wide, sir."
Finally, David said, "Lieutenant Stevens, all stop. This is the captain. The ship will go dark." Only life support continued to function, yet at minimum level, as Admiral Stone entered the bridge.
"Admiral on the bridge."
Larry bellowed. Admiral Stone said.
"Captain, from now on, let's dispense with all the social military falderall."
David responded, "Aye aye sir." "Larry, you heard the Admiral. Inform the crew, but we will still remain respectful." Larry replied.
"Aye aye, Captain."
Then to the Admiral, "What now, sir?" She replied.
"We wait."
Then she took a seat near the helm. Everything was deathly quiet. They were in a space of nothing. The bridge, the entire ship was silent. The only sound was of the crew breathing. After a while, the atmosphere started to smell very bad. Everyone grimaced at the stink, still no one made a noise. Tension was palatable, several of the crew seemed to be asleep. David signaled the sleeper's closest companion to wake the sleepers. Several female crewmen began to weep. Time wore on. After several hours, David called engineering. "O'Reilly, would you please put a little more power to the air scrubbers?" He responded.
"Aye aye, Captain, and thank you."
There came a sigh of relief as the stench of fear and anxiety began to be scrubbed from the air. Suddenly, Tall Jensen said.
"Captain, the screen."
There on the screen, a flashing beam of light. Tall said.
"It's old Morse code."
David looked. "Come ahead 5K, stand by to receive Admiral Keeler and Ambassador Styne." David called security. Security detail to the teleporter room, ruffles and flourishes. Turning to Admiral Stone, "Shall we?" The two descended to the teleporter room to await their guests. The security detail arrived, and David ordered, "Lasers on stun." David ordered, "Attention, ruffles, and flourishes." Then, as the two figures began forming, David ordered, "Cover them." And as the figures became solid, Admiral Keeler started.
Why are those lasers pointed at us?"
David replied, "Because we are working in very suspicious circumstances. I intend to safeguard my ship and crew above everything else. Let me take you to your cabins." The Admiral and Ambassador nodded assent. When the party arrived at the VIP cabins, David said, "You three are under arrest. You are confined to your cabins." Admiral Stone reacted.
"You can't do this."
David smiled. "Oh yes, I can." Computer, Admiral Stone, Admiral Keeler, and Ambassador Styne are confined to quarters. Admiral Stone asked.
"Why?"
David answered, "For now, for lying to us. Now, Please step into your cabins. The three quietly stepped into their cabins, and David assigned 3 security crewmen to stand guard and ordered the security chief to post a 24-hour guard, each shift 4 hours long. Then he ordered the door to Admiral Stone's cabin to open. Admiral Stone, I am ordering the ship to Sector 00. When we arrive, I am turning this over to the Navy to investigate. Make yourself comfortable. Computer, close and secure these 3 doors. Admiral Stone screamed.
I'll have your head for this, Captain.
But David returned to the bridge. David ordered, navigation, plot a course to Sector 00. Helm, UL-12. Execute. At the end of shift, Stella asked.
David, please, let's talk.
David smiled. Step into my parlor, said the spider to the fly, and he opened the door to his ready room, waved her in, and stepped in behind her. What would you like to talk about, sweetheart? She replied.
Well, about us. Why have you been avoiding me?
He replied, I haven't been avoiding you. If you may recall, the last time I was in our cabin, you avoided me, fed the kids, and spent the evening in Davy's room with the door closed. You didn't speak or even scream at me. It was easier to avoid conflict than to walk into it. She replied.
You left after dinner and didn't return.
He replied, your conversation with the Admiral was so exclusive, I was hung out to dry. So I tended to little Davy, which took until 2200 hours, and when I left Davy's room, you two were still gabbing so exclusively that I decided to give you space. It was obvious that you were not going to engage with me. Remember, you asked me if I was coming home at 2300 hours? Why you even bothered with that, I'll never understand, she said.
You're horribly mean.
He responded, you had better consider to whom you are speaking, Lieutenant. She spun around and stormed off. David sent another burst message to Admiral Halloran. Have taken aboard Admiral Keeler and Ambassador Styne. Admiral Stone, Admiral Keeler, and Ambassador Styne are under arrest and confined to quarters. Returning to Sector 00 for naval investigation. David directed the computer to notify him of any response. David directed, Tall, ship wide, please. Tall responded.
Ship wide, Captain.
David nodded. Now hear this. This is the captain. Admiral Keeler, Admiral Stone, and Ambassador Styne are under arrest. No one is to contact them without my direct orders. Captain out. Stella turned.
Sir, why are they under arrest?
David replied, as I told Admiral Stone, for now, for lying to us. She asked again.
Is she mad?
David said, oh yeah. She said she'll have my head. I have informed Admiral Halloran. He has the next step. Stella turned.
Captain, may I talk to her?
David replied, no. At shift change, Stella went to their quarters, and David picked their kids up from the childcare facility and took them home. Upon arrival, Stella had set dinner for herself, Ginny, and little Davy. David just looked at her, then turned and left the cabin. He went to the rec room, ordered the replicator to produce a meal, sat quietly, and ate. Afterward, he went to his ready room and slept at his desk. The pain in his heart was excruciating, but he fought back the tears and finally slept. Come ship's morning, he went to the vacant cabin he had used before, showered, got a new uniform from the replicator, went to the bridge, and assumed the center chair. As the day shift arrived and settled into the routine, David asked, status? Each station on the bridge answered, green sir. Finally, Stella replied.
Course for Sector 00, UL-12, status green sir.
David watched her face as she spoke. She looked clean, bright, and cheery, and the pain in his heart grew, it seemed, tenfold. The pain in David's heart seemed to grow as the day wore on. Finally, David said, Larry, you have the con. And he went into his ready room, sat at his desk, and tried unsuccessfully to stop his tears, crying silently. After about half an hour, he had composed himself, and when the annunciator sounded, he replied, come in. And the security chief stepped in.
Captain, Admiral Keeler wishes to talk to you.
David replied, bring him in. The chief stepped out and signaled the admiral in. David stood, please have a seat, Admiral, and tell me what's on your mind. The admiral said,
Captain, we owe you an explanation.
David replied, you owe me nothing, sir. I apologize for holding you 3, but I must safeguard my crew and ship. Your explanation would not alter things in any way. We are en route to Sector 00 Navy Headquarters. Admiral Halloran will sort this out. The Admiral nodded.
You're still going to pursue this course.
David said, yes, I have no choice. I was deliberately misled so that I cannot trust you three. The Admiral replied,
I understand. If you'll send me back to my cabin, I'll await Admiral Halloran. And you should understand that there will be consequences for all this.
David called the security chief and directed him to escort the Admiral to his quarters. David contemplated his visit with the Admiral when the annunciator sounded again. David called, come in. And Stella stepped in.
David, what's happened between us?
He looked at her. I guess we're just being childish. She raised her voice.
I'm not being childish.
David replied, that will be all, Lieutenant, dismissed. She started to turn but stopped.
David, we need to fix this. Little Davy and Ginny miss you.
He replied, all right, let's be specific. You have excluded me ever since you and Admiral Stone walked out of my ready room. Is that specific enough? She answered.
It was nothing. I just didn't think you needed to know.
He responded, I don't care about that. You can have your little girly secrets, but I might have as well been in Timbuktu that evening. You both turned away from me, pointedly excluding me. I took care of Davy, and you couldn't have cared less. You two spent 5 hours, and I was excluded. I deserve better than that from you. But if you want to separate, that'll be just fine. You can go on swing shift. That should give you the space you need. Stella said.
I don't want space, I want you.
David looked at her, tears in his eyes. That's what I needed to hear. I felt like I was not needed or wanted in your life anymore. I'm your husband, I know that I'm not number one in your life right now, but I should be number 3. But the way you and the Admiral shut me out, in my own cabin, I felt like I was a non-entity, she said.
But David, you are number 1.
He answered, no. Virginia is number 1, and David Jr. is number 2. But I'm your husband and I ought to be number 3 at least. And after your conversation with the Admiral, I was number last or worse. I wish you could feel the pain and humiliation I suffered. Stella looked down.
David, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize I hurt you. I want to make it all up to you. I'm so sorry. Will you forgive me?
David straightened and said, yes, my dear wife, he whispered, with all my heart. Stella snapped to attention.
Permission to leap on you, Captain.
David grinned, granted. And she leapt on him with many kisses, crying for joy. Then she said,
Admiral Stone asked me if we were happy. Then she said that I was so lucky to have a man like you, a real man and good looking, too. And we laughed. That's all.
Larry called David.
Captain, Sector 00 in 20 minutes.
David replied, Roger, number 1. Standard procedures. Tall, please try to contact Admiral Halloran. When you raise him, transfer the call here to my ready room. Tall replied,
Aye, Captain.
David turned to Stella, sweetheart, please take the helm. She saluted smartly, turned, and left. David took the command chair and ordered, standard orbit. Stella responded smiling.
Standard orbit, aye sir.
David said, Tall, can you get Admiral Halloran on the comm? Tall replied,
I'll try again, Captain.
After a moment, Tall said,
Captain, Admiral Halloran.
To which David responded, on screen. The Admiral looked out of the view screen.
David, my boy, good to see you. Would you please teleport your 3 guests here to my office?
David left the bridge, went to the VIP suites, and asked his 3 guests to accompany him to the teleporter room for transport to Admiral Halloran's office. The 3 assigned guards accompanied them, and the 3 were teleported off the ship to Admiral Halloran's office. The teleporter operator assured David that the 3 had arrived safely. Admiral Halloran called.
David, remain in orbit for a while and give your crew shore leave. Then, bring your beautiful wife with you and see me in my office in an hour.
David and Stella arrived at the Admiral's office and were greeted by Admiral Halloran.
Ah, David, Stella, so happy to see you. First, let me tell you about your 3 guests. They were under orders from the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral York. Admiral Stone lied to you because she thought using my name would make you more amenable to being part of her mission. So she asked me to extend you her apologies.
David shrugged. Okay. But she had better never try to rope me into any other mission. I don't like being lied to. The Admiral sighed.
Well kids, let's have dinner.
He smiled.
At the officers' club, on me.
10 days later, the crew had all spent their time on shore leave and were ready to go into the unknown, where no man had ever been before. David sat in his ready room, idly tinkering with a few ideas about improving the ship's security, when a call came in. Admiral York looked out at David and spoke.
Captain Stevens, I have a mission for you.
David nodded. Yes, sir? The chief said.
I am placing you under Admiral Stone's command to rescue the Enterprise's crew from krill space.
David looked at the view screen. Have you been apprised of my opinion and feelings about Admiral Stone? The CNO replied.
Your opinion and feelings are irrelevant. She will teleport aboard your ship within the hour. I believe you are a sailor who will follow your superior's orders despite your feelings and opinions. I have complete confidence in Admiral Stone and you. I trust I have made myself clear, Captain.
David nodded. Aye, sir. Then the Admiral smiled.
York out.
And the view screen went back to the usual screensaver. David called Larry. Number 1, Admiral Stone will come aboard soon. Please greet her and escort her to her cabin. Make it the same one she had before. Let me know when she is aboard. I'll meet you at her cabin. Larry replied.
Shouldn't you be with me in the transporter room?
David responded. Just tell her I'm getting ready for her briefing in an hour in the conference room. Larry shrugged.
Aye, sir.
At the Admiral's cabin, David greeted her and welcomed her aboard. She glared at David.
I know you're angry at me, Captain, but we will work together on this mission, understand?
David replied, I have set aside my anger and feelings and we will work together, Admiral. The only thing I ask is to be told the truth. No lies, no matter how small, and no secrets, no matter how small. Is that understood? David could see the fire in her eyes, and that subsided, and she smiled.
Agreed, Captain. Briefing in an hour?
David nodded. Aye, sir, in the conference room. The Admiral spoke.
Everything I told you about our attempts to make a treaty with the Krill was true. The factions opposing the treaty are equally true. We will not join these factions but safeguard the Ambassador and the Admiral. We will provide security and facilities for the negotiations aboard the Constitution. We will always be on yellow alert and ready to fight for our lives if necessary. Once the negotiation party is aboard, we will be a moving target. Any questions?
David asked. When you say moving target, where will we be moving to, from, and what? She replied.
That, my dear Captain, will be up to you. We can go any place between Krill Space and Sector 00. Are you ready?
The officers in the conference room replied.
We are ready, sir.
She said.
Then, Captain, set a course for Krill Space UL-12. Let's be on our way.
David looked at the Admiral. Admiral York said we would be rescuing the Enterprise. What about that? She responded.
We will attend to that while the treaty negotiations are going on in your conference room. I'm not sure how, but I believe you will rescue the Enterprise.
David looked around the conference room. Okay, you bilge rats, let's shove off. Dismissed. Everyone almost ran out of the conference room. David called, Tal, ship-wide, please. Tal replied.
Ship-wide, sir.
David said, now hear this. This is the captain. Prepare to leave orbit. This ship will return to Krill Space, but we will host the treaty negotiations and seek to rescue the USS Enterprise. As of now, this ship is on yellow alert. That is all, Captain out. Taking his seat in the command chair, David ordered, Hank, plot a course to Krill Space, helm, UL-12. Execute. And the Constitution began the mission in earnest.